Once upon a time, darts crowds used to look like this, but now they look like this. So I'm going to try and answer the question how darts has come so far along that once upon a time you would be sat next to a gentleman in a very woolly jumper smoking his pipe, and how now in 2026, if you went to live darts, you could be sat next to someone dressed as a 6'5" inflatable dinosaur. So to understand how modern darts culture came about, we need to go far back to the origins. Not that far back, just to the early 1970s. Now this is where darts was purely a working class game. It still is working class now, but even back then, way more working class. It'd be two lads down pit, they'd come back up after an hard day's graft, and they'd play for 10 bob, a game of darts at a working men's club. Smoke would fill the air. You couldn't breathe in there apparently, just from what my nan says. Obviously I wasn't there. But yeah, working class game. And then in the mid-1970s, everything started to change. Darts went onto TV. The News of the World tournament. 10,000 people packed Alexandra Palace. Once again, boozy, smoke-filled. What an image that was, by the way. I'll put it up on screen now.
Yeah! And that's a tremendous shot out. I honestly did not see that. It even took Alexandra Palace by surprise because he wanted 107, I think it was, and he got it in the most spectacular fashion that even left the commentator speechless. Tremendous shot out for Chapman to level the game.
People going absolutely crazy for the darts for the first time on TV, and that's when the big broadcasters had an idea.
World Professional Championships, would you welcome back on stage, Bobby Jones.
So the BBC saw the success that ITV had with the News of the World Darts Championship and basically said, yeah, we'll have a piece of that, boys. So that's exactly what they did. And in 1978, the first ever World Professional Darts Championship happened on the BBC in 1978. Leighton Rees beat John Lowe, and this was the start of something mega.
Double tops to take the world's major prize.
Now this was the moment the sport of darts sort of released themselves from the shackles of being just a hobby known as playing in a pub to being a genuine career option for really top class dart players. And the viewing figures matched it as well. Millions of people would tune into the World Championships because it was free to air TV. You didn't have to pay for it, and my nan says back then you only had about 4 channels anyway, so you had to watch it. So millions of people were watching people like Jockey Wilson, Eric Bristow, John Lowe. They were watching them every year at the World Championships. Families would sit down just to watch the darts, and they were becoming household names. And the viewing figures also translated into live audiences. So now the World Championships was moved after 1978 and moved over to the Frimley Green at Lakeside, where it was held until now, which is the BDOs, the WDF. That's a whole conversation for a different video. But yeah, basically they had to move the venue because the demand for tickets was so high. Thousands of people wanted to come and watch the darts. But the crowd that went, it was different to what it is now. People that were there to watch the darts and watch the darts only. There was no giant screen of being able to see what was going in. So I bet you're thinking, well, how did they see? Well, there was 2 ways. Some people, believe it or not, would bring binoculars and watch the dartboard from where they were, which I find hilarious. Or there was the second option. There was an official sat on stage with a giant dartboard in front of him that had buttons for each segment. So there'd be a button for double top, a button for single 20, a button for the treble, and a button for the small section. And every time he pressed the button, there was a giant dartboard where the screen would be, and it would light up that part. So if someone hit a treble 20, he'd press the treble 20 button, and there'd be a giant dartboard, and that'd light up. And that is how the crowd would know what was hit. How bloody good is that? Anyway, less about me fanboying over the way they used to show the scores and more about the crowds. Now, at this point, dressing up for the crowds was simply finding whichever best suit jacket they had on that didn't have a cigarette burn in it. That was what dressing up was for the crowd. Seeing them in suits was very common, but obviously now it's completely different. How did we get there? Well, this is where the next part of the story takes quite a sad turn. So by the late 80s, TV culture and British culture was changing quite a lot, but darts stayed exactly the same. And this wasn't very appealing to broadcasters and advertisers. Now, what do I mean by this? Basically, TV wanted to clean up the image of darts. Now, what was happening on a dart stage? Players were drinking, players were smoking, players were sometimes falling off the stage because they were so drunk, and it just didn't look good. in terms of a sponsorship and a clean image sort of thing. It was very real, and that's why people really liked it. You know, I personally would allow it now, but it's not very good for sponsorships and advertisers. Brands didn't want to be associated with a dart player falling off a stage because he was drunk and appearing in the papers next day. That's bad PR as far as they're concerned. So, unfortunately, towards the end of the 80s, sponsorship started getting pulled from darts, which meant they went from 4 or 5, 6 TV tournaments a year to just one, the World Championships, which meant these working class heroes that built their fortune up through darts, unfortunately had most of it taken away because they couldn't sustain that same amount of money they were making through the previous TV tournaments to what they were now. So with TV coverage at an all-time low, sponsors pulling out, less people watching the darts, the top players in the world had to come to a very difficult decision. And in 1992, the top 16 players in the world at the time decided, we're going to create our own darts organisation, we're going to create our own tournaments, and we're going to try and take darts to the next level. What a brave decision that is. And these weren't just anybody, this is Phil Taylor, Dennis Priestley, John Lowe, I think Keith Deller was in the top 16 at the time. Just unbelievable dart players. Now, when your top 16 decide to bugger off, it's very difficult to carry on because everyone will know that the best players are playing somewhere else. So that's exactly what they tried to take advantage of. It wasn't to create chaos. They genuinely wanted a new organisation, more TV tournaments. They thought they could do it, and they definitely did. Now, you're all thinking, what the bloody hell, Tom, has this got to do with fancy dress? Well, hold on. We're getting there.
Now, imagine winning a world title, only to be told that you and the rest of the big names in your sport have been banned. Well, it's happened in darts. 16 of the world's top players have just been told that they're now barred from all official tournaments.
The growing rift between the world's top darts players and those who run the sport has reached breaking point. Essentially, it's a row over television coverage, or as the players see it, the lack of it. Here it's John Lowe, the new world champion, playing Mike Gregory in the UK Masters, held in Norwich before Christmas. This was the first televised tournament staged by the newly formed World Darts Council, a breakaway organisation set up by the top players in an attempt to increase TV coverage.
So the stalls had been set out. The BDO continued to exist for the more amateur side of the game, whereas the PDC were formed and they were looking to take professional darts to the very next level and clean up the image of the sport. Well, I said clean up. I've cleaned myself up. You probably noticed I've had a haircut between takes. I was just looking at the footage back then. I thought, bloody hell, Tom, you look awful. Better get you a haircut. So, voila. Anyway, on with the story. So the PDC launched their first ever tournament on Anglia TV, which is now known as ITV, and it was called the Larder Masters back in 1992. And the winner got £5,000 and a Larder car. It was won by Mike Gregory. Like, what a weird prize for a darts tournament, an actual car. But yeah, after that, a lot of people thought that was quite good, but the numbers weren't great on TV, the prize money was very low, and there were quite a few sceptical people that thought this is not going to work. But then that all changed when Sky Sports got involved.
Games to become the first ever school world champion.
So when Sky Sports first got involved in the darts, it was for their first ever PDC World Championship, then known as the WDC. 1994, and Dennis Priestley won that, beating Phil Taylor in the final. One of the only times Phil Taylor was beaten in a world final by such a massive scoreline. But anyway, less about that. Sky looked at the darts then through a different angle. How can we make this a more commercially attractive sport? Stuff that would make it more of a show, more of a spectacle than just two guys having a game of darts. And that's when they introduced the walk-ons.
From London, the crafty Cockney, Eric Bristow!
Now, walk-ons existed back in the BDO days at Lakeside. They existed, but they were really short. Music was never played originally at the Lakeside. They would announce the players, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eric Bristow, and everyone would clap. He'd walk through some double doors, and that'd be it. That'd be the end of the walk-on. It was almost an afterthought. It was just you're introducing a player to the match. But when Sky got involved, oh my lord, they took it to the next level. They would have the players walking through the crowd, which was never really heard of before, and they walked through that crowd very, very closely. Stuff that you would never do now. Bob Anderson had an extremely famous walk-on where his nickname was the Limestone Cowboy, and they brought in an actual bloody horse. I could not believe that when I saw that, but yeah, they brought in a horse for the walk-on. That could have ended terribly. But this is the point I'm making. It became an absolute spectacle. People started enjoying the walk-ons a lot more. The walk-ons became a part of darts culture. And it wasn't just the walk-ons that were changing either. It was every aspect of the production side of showing darts on TV. The stage sets were different. The lighting was different. They overhauled the entire thing because the PDC wanted darts to make it look like it was made to be on TV. And this is where the culture started changing. Remember earlier I said about in the BDO days, the old BDO days, there wasn't a TV screen that you could watch the darts on. That started changing, so you could see the darts now. But the PDC saw this and thought, you only ever see the dartboard, don't you, in the early days? Why don't we have some cameras in the crowd as well? And this is what changed everything. Now, if there's one thing people love, it's being on TV. I know, like, some people hate the idea of having the face on camera. Believe it or not, I do, which is wild considering I do this for a job. But in terms of being on TV, people love it. People want to get this end seen at the darts. And that's what happened. Cameras started going round. There'd be cameramen roaming the crowd. And someone at some point thought, I know how to get on TV. I'm going to dress up. So that's exactly how it all started. That was the first building block of fancy dressing darts. And it started spiralling and spiralling because people saw people getting on TV and they thought, I'm going to do that. So more people started to dress up. And then in 2008, it went absolutely bloody mental. So in the lead up to 2008, the PDC was absolutely booming. Tickets were selling out everywhere for every tournament. You would start struggling to get tickets, basically. That's how big it was becoming. And in 2007, the greatest ever world final took place between Raymond van Barneveld and Phil Taylor. Raymond van Barneveld defeated Phil Taylor in a sudden death leg to win his first PDC World Championship. But then after that, the PDC realised this venue that we currently have for the World Championship, the Circus Tavern, it's just not big enough anymore. The tickets that they could have sold out the venue 2 or 3 times over. So what did they do? Well, they moved, and they moved to the now iconic Alexandra Palace where it's held today. Now, the Alexandra Palace was a much bigger space than the Circus Tavern. The Circus Tavern was very intimate and dark, whereas the Alexandra Palace is very open, very bright. You can see everything, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people dress up as well, because if you're there on the day and you watch it back on TV later, no matter where you are in the crowd, you probably will be able to spot yourself. Again, being on TV. And not just that, there's obviously one massive important detail that I'm missing out, and it's that the World Darts Championship is held around Christmas. So you've got Christmas celebrations, tons of alcohol, stag do's, party goers, end of year celebrations, all crammed into this one place. Mix that up with the PDC's extravaganza, and what have you got? You've got a load of people in fancy dress at the biggest party in the world. And obviously the PDC noticed that more and more people were turning up in fancy dress. So what did they do? They made segments out of it. There used to be a segment during the World Championships called
Wayne's World's favourite fancy dress,
where Wayne Mardle would walk around the crowd and he would pick out what he thought was the best fancy dress for that day, and they would win prizes. They'd win shirts and merchandise and stuff like that. So it was becoming a competitive thing. Fancy dress, how crazy is that? People were trying to outdo everybody. And that is where the next beast comes into play, and that's, of course, social media. So around 2010 and a bit further on after that, I imagine that most of you watching this video will have had some sort of smartphone, or at least something with a camera on it that wasn't complete crap. Like, if you remember the old brick phones that had cameras, you took it and you were like, what the bloody hell's that? No, decent cameras. And the reason why I mentioned that is it then became a social media bonanza of all these people getting dressed up, going at darts. They'd put photos on the profile, likes led to shares, shares led to thousands and hundreds of thousands of people watching other people dress up for darts, if that makes sense. And then they'd end up in articles, and it just blew the whole thing up. Social media had a massive say on dressing up for darts. I have no doubt about that. So if you take a step back and look at the history of darts from, say, 1978, when it first started being televised regularly, to 2026 now, the fancy dress aspect clearly wasn't an accident. It wasn't just some guy turned up one day dressed as an Oompa Loompa and everyone looked at him and went, you know what, we'll have a piece of that. That's what we're all going to do. It was more to do with the changing times in the culture in general, and The PDC decided to take darts and treated it more of I'd say a commercial product rather than a sport in terms of marketing, and you've ended up with fancy dress what it is today. Obviously, moving to Alexandra Palace had a massive effect. Way more people, much brighter place, everyone can see everybody. Now, I know what you're thinking, Tom, why the bloody hell are you doing a deep dive, Monday Night Football style analysis of fancy dressing darts? The reason why I can do these videos in the first place is because of your support, not only on the channel, but on our online dart shop, Premier Darts. Now, I'm not going to stand here and try and sell you a VPN or a bunch of ready meals. So what I have got is actually a sister company to Premier Darts called Fancy Dress Central. Now, it's just had a brand new, like a revamp on the website. So I'm going to leave a link in the description. If you feel like you want to dress up, or if you're going to live darts yourself and fancy getting in dress up and fancy dress, click that link. And it's the exact same service as what you get from us at Premier Darts. Same warehouse, same team. So little Johnny that normally packs a set of Luke Littlers, he'll pack his set of Luke Littlers off to one of you guys. Next order comes through and it's a giant 6-foot banana. That must be a weird job. But yeah, and the best thing about it is I'm not going to be modelling any of them. But it's this next bit. I said something really silly in a business meeting we had at Premier Darts the other day. I said, oh guys, I'm playing in my first ADC tournament tonight actually. And I said to him, I tell you what, if I win it, you can put me in any fancy dress you like. And it was only a joke, but then the guys went, that's a great idea. So I'm playing in a tournament tonight, and if I win it, I've got to do the next video in fancy dress. That's why I've decided to do this video, just to prep you for what could be coming in a future video. Thank you very much for watching. I actually hope I don't win the tournament, but who knows. See you next time.